In 1904, a German general issued a written order. It was short. It was formal. It was signed. The order said this: any Herero man, woman, or child found within German territory would be shot. Those who fled into the Omahik Desert would be left to die of thirst. There would be no exceptions. There would be no prisoners. The German Empire had just announced the first genocide of the 20th century, and it did so on paper, in ink, with a name attached. General Lothar von Trotha. Remember that name, because almost no one taught you his. What you are about to hear is not a theory. It is not a fringe interpretation of contested events. It is documented history, recorded in German military archives, corroborated by missionary testimony, confirmed by the bones of tens of thousands of people still buried in the Namibian sand. The Herero and Nama genocide lasted from 1904 to 1908. It killed between 65,000 and 100,000 people, more than 80% of the entire Herero population. And for most of the 20th century, it was treated as a colonial footnote. A minor incident. A matter of administration. The country where it happened was called German Southwest Africa. Today it is Namibia. The people it was carried out upon were among the most prosperous cattle herding communities on the continent. And the ideology that drove it, the language used, the methods deployed, would be studied, refined, and repeated 4 decades later, on a far greater scale, by the very same nation. This is not a story about the distant past. This is a story about where the worst chapters of the 20th century actually began. Before the war came, the Herero were wealthy. Not wealthy in the European colonial sense, not in gold, not in factories, but in cattle, in land, and in a way of life so deeply organized that German administrators who first arrived in the region were struck by how little they had to offer. The Herero controlled vast stretches of what is now central Namibia. Their herds numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Their social structure was sophisticated, built around patrilineal and matrilineal clans that governed inheritance, spiritual authority, and community life simultaneously. They were, by any honest measure, a civilization. Germany formally claimed Southwest Africa as a protectorate in 1884, during the Scramble for Africa, that decades-long contest in which European powers drew lines on a continent they had never walked, dividing 10 million square miles of land, culture, and people into colonies with no input from a single African voice. German settlers began arriving in the 1890s. They wanted the land. And the land belonged to the Herero. What followed was a grinding, decade-long dispossession. German settlers purchased land at fraudulent prices. German traders extended credit to Herero cattle owners at extortionate interest, then seized cattle when debts could not be paid. German law courts systematically ruled against Herero plaintiffs. Every legal mechanism available was used to strip the Herero of what was theirs, slowly, methodically, with the full sanction of the colonial government in Windhoek. By 1903, resentment had reached a breaking point. The Herero leader Samuel Maharero watched his people lose cattle, lose land, lose access to water sources that had sustained them for generations. He had tried negotiation. He had tried petitions. He had worked within the colonial system with patience that should never have been required of him. And the system had returned nothing but more loss. What came next was not irrational. It was not savage. It was the response of a people who had run out of any other option. January 12, 1904. The Herero uprising began. Samuel Maharero coordinated attacks on German farms and military outposts across the territory. His orders were explicit. Do not kill women, do not kill children, do not kill missionaries, do not kill Boer settlers who had shown no hostility. These were the rules of a man who understood the difference between war and massacre. The Herero killed approximately 120 German settlers in the initial outbreak. The German Empire responded as if the entirety of European civilization had been threatened. The Kaiser dispatched Lieutenant General Lothar von Trotha to the territory in June 1904. Von Trotha was not a diplomat. He was not a peacekeeper. He was a man with a record of suppressing African resistance in German East Africa and China with systematic, deliberate brutality. A man who had already demonstrated that he understood indigenous populations not as people to be governed, but as problems to be solved. He arrived in Southwest Africa with 14,000 troops, artillery, and a philosophy. He called it Schrecklichkeit. It translates, cleanly and without euphemism, as frightfulness. The deliberate use of terror as a military instrument against a civilian population. On August 11, 1904, the two forces met at the Battle of Waterberg. The German military had planned an encirclement, trap the Herero on all sides and annihilate them. The encirclement failed. The Herero broke through the southern flank and retreated into the Omahit Desert. They took their women, their children, their elderly, and their remaining cattle with them. Von Trotha did not pursue them into the desert to fight them. He did something far more calculated. He sealed the desert. German troops positioned themselves along a 200-mile cordon at the edge of the Omahik, the waterless expanse that the Herero had entered believing they might survive. Von Trotha poisoned or sealed every waterhole. Soldiers themselves in letters home that their families kept. Thousands of Herero died of thirst within days of the cordon being sealed. Women digging desperately with their hands at dried riverbeds. Children who stopped crying before they stopped breathing. Cattle collapsing in the sand beside their owners. German soldiers who attempted to guide survivors toward water were ordered back. One German officer, Lieutenant Zern, recorded in his diary that he watched women and children die at a waterhole that German troops had deliberately contaminated. He wrote it down. He felt something. And then he followed his orders. Those Herero who were captured were not freed. They were placed in concentration camps, a term that was not yet infamous but was already in use by German military authorities, borrowed from the British experience in the Boer War. The camps at Shark Island, at Luderitz, at Swakopmund became death facilities. Prisoners were used as forced labor, fed starvation rations, subjected to medical experiments by German military doctors, including Dr. Eugen Fischer, who would later go on to influence the racial hygiene laws of the Third Reich directly. Prisoners died at rates of 60 to 70%. Their skulls, thousands of them, were sent back to Germany as scientific specimens. Herero women were ordered to boil and scrape the heads of their own dead for shipment to universities in Berlin. Some of those skulls sat in German institutions until 2011, when the first small batch was finally returned to Namibia. The Nama people, a separate nation who had been watching, rose in resistance under Hendrik Witbooi in 1904 and Simon Cooper in 1906. The German military responded identically. The same camps, the same death rates, the same deliberate destruction of a people. By 1908, when the German government finally curtailed the campaign, the Herero population had collapsed from approximately 80,000 people to fewer than 15,000. The Nama had lost half their population. And Germany had proved something to itself, that extermination was possible, that it could be organized, that it could be sanctioned by paper, that a modern state could kill a people and call it administration. Lothar von Trotha was recalled to Germany in 1905, not because of the genocide, but because the costs of his campaign were becoming inconvenient. He returned to a hero's reception. He was awarded the Pour le Mérite, Prussia's highest military honor. He died in 1920, celebrated. His extermination order, the Vernichtungsbefehl, was placed in the German Imperial Archives, where it remained accessible to historians but largely ignored by the political mainstream for almost a century. Germany did not officially acknowledge the Herero and Nama genocide until 2021, 117 years after the extermination order was issued. In that year, German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas used the word genocide for the first time in an official government statement. Germany agreed to pay 1.1 billion euros in development aid to Namibia over 30 years. It did not agree to pay reparations, a distinction that Herero and Nama descendants rejected outright. The word reparations was explicitly avoided in the agreement. The Namibian government, which had negotiated without including the affected communities at the table, signed anyway. Herero and Nama leaders publicly condemned the deal as a continuation of the erasure by other means. The connection to what came next is not speculation. It is documented by scholars including Hannah Arendt, who noted that the techniques developed in German Southwest Africa, concentration camps, forced labor, deliberate starvation, racial categorization, the bureaucratic management of mass death, were laboratories for what Germany would systematize in Europe 3 decades later. Eugen Fischer's racial research conducted on Herero prisoners was cited directly in the academic work that informed Nazi eugenics law. The Nuremberg laws of 1935 drew from a legal and intellectual tradition that had been tested in Namibia. The Holocaust did not emerge from nothing. It emerged from a pattern. And the first data point in that pattern was the Omahik Desert, in 1904, where a general sealed the water and waited. What makes the cover-up possible is not conspiracy. It is category. If a genocide happens to people who were already classified as colonial subjects, as lesser, as primitive, as obstacles to progress, then the event does not register as a crime against humanity. It registers as history, as development, as an unfortunate necessity. The entire architecture of European colonialism was built to make this kind of moral arithmetic seem normal. And so the Herero bones bleached in the Namibian sun, and the textbooks moved on, and the scholars who might have taught you this story were working in universities that received endowments built on the same colonial economy that funded von Trotha's army. The erasure was not a single act. It was a structure. It was ongoing. And in most of the world's classrooms, it is still in effect right now. The lesson history refuses to learn is not that evil exists. We know that. The lesson is about category, about who gets counted when we count the dead. The Herero and Nama were not counted, not for 100 years, because the system that killed them was also the system that wrote the history of what happened. That system did not disappear when the German Empire fell. It reorganized. It renamed itself. It built libraries and universities and international bodies. And it kept the skulls. You now know what happened in Namibia between 1904 and 1908. You know the name of the man who ordered it. You know that the document exists, signed, in an archive. What you do with that knowledge, whether it changes how you read the next century of history, is the only question that matters. Say the name, Herero. Say the word, genocide. Because the first act of erasure is silence. And silence, as it turns out, is something you can choose to end.